Tonight, we're going to talk about preachers and teachers. We're going to use, Lloyd gave me an outline that I'm going to rely on heavily tonight. I have two spare copies of it. Does anybody have their, you got yours, you have yours, Rich? Yeah. Okay, so if you need a loaner, I've got two copies. The first thing we're going to look at simply is a very simple PowerPoint tonight, just very few slides in it. Let me get rid of this jacket. Hope that'll stay on there. It came loose pretty rough. Simply going to take a few scriptures and then we're going to start looking at this outline. The first of which is Titus 2, 7 and 8 about being careful about your life and your teaching. This for the preachers particularly, although it is true about every Christian, or it should be. In all things show yourself to be a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that one who is an opponent may be ashamed, not having anything evil to say of you. We also will refer a good bit to 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy tonight to be able to complete this outline. The outline, and I've taken this from the outline, by the way, from the pages that you have in your hands. We're not going to read every word of the outline. It would take us too long. I'm hoping to finish this within the hour. Some ideas that Paul wrote to each of these men. Keep yourself pure. Be an example to the believers. Have a love for the lost. Have a good conscience. Be diligent and persevere, which included in the outline. Take heed to the teaching. Hold the pattern of sound words and shun false doctrine. The next one will be about teachers, and it is short indeed. So we'll be taking it from 1 Timothy, and as we go, there are some Bibles in here. You may want to pull one up close to you. We're going to take turns reading, if that's all right with you. Under the first paragraph, simply, preachers' qualifications, and it says much has been said rightly so about the qualifications of elders and of the church. Preachers are quick to say that a man who does not possess the scriptural qualifications of an elder should not be in that office, but many times we overlook the fact that men who preach the gospel are to have certain qualifications, and that a man who does not possess these scriptural qualities should not be in the pulpit. We do not need to say less about qualifications of elders, but we do need to say more about the qualifications of preachers. Paul told Titus that in all things he should show himself an example of good works, the first one that we read a few moments ago. In doctrine, and that is showing uncorruptness, with gravity and sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of us. And that's from Titus 2, 7 and 8. From this we see that the preacher must be careful about two things, his life and his teaching. So we go to the first one up here, take heed to yourself, or the last one we read out of the prior scripture, take heed to yourself. And this is an admonition, he says, that Paul gives to Timothy. Take heed to yourself and to things. In doing this, you shall save both yourself and them that hear you. 1 Timothy 4:16. As I said, I'm going to take turns, if you don't mind reading. John, would you take up at the first one there, the 1, keep yourself pure?
Oh, you mean that
Read out of the outline, yes, sir.
keep thyself pure, 1 Timothy 5:22 and on. There is no more fundamental or essential qualification for a gospel preacher than this one. One cannot preach the gospel without a knowledge of the gospel. Hence, a knowledge of the gospel is essential. But a knowledge of the gospel in the hands of an impure and ungodly man will be powerless. 1 Corinthians 13. Hence, purity is equally essential with a knowledge of the gospel. First, a preacher of the gospel needs to keep his mind pure. He needs to guard his heart because out of it are the issues of his life. Proverbs 4. And from it may come all kinds of evil. Mark 7:22 through 23. And the way to keep his heart pure is to fill it with spiritual thoughts. David said a young man can cleanse his way by taking heed to the word of God and laying it up in his heart. Psalms 119. The chief difference between the righteous and the wicked is that the righteous man meditates on the law of the Lord day and night. Psalms 1. While the wicked man meditates on that which is evil. Psalms 36 and Proverbs 6. Paul tells us to think on things good, pure, just, honorable, lovely, and virtuous. It's in Philippians 4. Next, a preacher must be pure in his conversation. A pure mind will make that possible. Certainly the preacher should not engage in conversation at any time which is impure and unfit for the very purest minds to entertain. Filthy jokes are out of place for any Christian, much less for a preacher who is to be an example to others in his words. 1 Timothy 4. Example to believers. No one can be an example to others without possessing qualities to a higher degree than others. One cannot lead another unless he stays out in front. One cannot lift up another unless he is above the one he would lift. So the preacher is to be pure enough in life to lead others to better living. He is to purify, strengthen, and ennoble others by getting them to follow his example. Paul tells Timothy to be an example to the believers in word, in manner of life, in love, in faith, in purity. 1 Timothy 4. How can the preacher be an example to others in purity when he is not as pure as they are? How can he be an example to believers in love for God and the lost when he does not love as deeply and fervently as the believers? The very fact that the preacher is to be an example to believers in these matters means that the preacher is to be developed in these things to a greater degree than the believers. Other things in which the preacher is to set an example are found in Paul's admonition to Timothy. Quote, "But thou, O man of God, flee these things, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness." 1 Timothy 6.
John, when you get tired of reading past
I'm done. I'm done. That's why I stopped.
Okay, I wasn't sure I didn't know
if
for
that's
sure.
okay.
All right, Bill, would you
Sure.
take up there?
3, love for the lost. One of the qualifications of a preacher of the gospel is that he has an intense, fervent love for the lost. Paul says the Lord's servant must not strive, but be gentle towards all, in meekness correcting them that they may oppose themselves, that they may recover themselves from the snare of the devil. 2 Timothy 2:24 through 26. Paul said he was gentle among the people to whom he preached, as gentle as a nurse when she cherishes her own child, because they they were become very dear unto him. 1 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8. He loved the lost too much to be rough, harsh, and unkind in his treatment of them. He could not abuse them by unkind statements, nor wound them with sharp criticisms, because he loved them as much as a mother loves her child. So intense was his love for the lost that he said, I wish that I myself were anathema from Christ for my brethren's sake. His Jewish, and that's in Romans 9:3, his Jewish brethren were lost because they had rejected Christ, Romans 10:2 and 3. And Paul was so concerned for their salvation that he said he would be willing to be anathema from Christ if that would save them. Perhaps there is nothing which will make the gospel more effective in the heart of the hearer than such a love in the heart of the preacher. A cold, heartless presentation of the truth will fail, where a warm, loving presentation of the same truth will win. This love for the lost not only causes preachers to be gentle in dealing with sinners, but it will drive the preacher out into the harvest field to gather the grain before it falls. Paul's love drove him from place to place where the gospel had never been preached, that he might reach as many lost souls as possible. It made him endure hardships and persecutions to the extent unknown to any other man of his day. And it will make preachers today spend more time and energy going from person to person, trying to lead them to the Lord before they die in their lost condition. A preacher who refuses to do anything other than pulpit work does not love the lost. There are so many people who will never go to hear a man in the pulpit until their interest is quickened by personal work, that a preacher and other church members should spend a lot of time personally cultivating the interests of the lost, that they may be saved. Number 4, a good conscience. Paul told Timothy he should have a good conscience. 1 Timothy 1:19. No preacher can have a good conscience while preaching things which he knows he does not practice in his own life. The scribes and Pharisees taught the law of Moses. They said, but did not. Matthew 23:3. Preachers sometimes excuse themselves by saying it is easier to preach than to practice. A very godly preacher once said, when my practice gets behind my preaching, I will quit preaching until my practice catches up. Sincerity and consistency demands that the preacher practice what he teaches others to do. Diligence, number 5. Preachers are to give diligence to show themselves approved unto God, workmen that need not to be ashamed, handling aright the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2:15. They are to be diligent in their work, that their progress may be manifest to all, 1 Timothy 4:15. To be diligent means to be persevering, attentive, assiduous, and industrious. These words, lazy, careless, and indifferent, have the opposite meaning and describe the preacher who is not diligent. And I'll pause.
Okay. Rather than read straight through, let me pause long enough to allow discussion, conversation, questions. Anybody has something that they'd like to talk about on the things we've already looked at?
Well, Philip, are you perfect?
No?
You're held to an awful high standard.
I think so.
So when you fail, are you any different than any other Christian?
Not in that sense.
Well, the qualifications it's talking here, most of them would apply to just a Christian in general.
Yes.
Because, and that's one thing I think that is a problem in the brotherhood in congregations, because a lot of the members think that the preacher or the elders or the deacons are the ones who should be going out and teaching and preaching and trying to reach the lost, and they sort of excuse themselves from this because they think that the aforementioned groups are responsible, and it's not. It's for everyone to go out and try to persuade people who are lost. So,
Well, and it well may be that the member knows someone the preacher doesn't know
that's true.
and has influence with that person that the preacher doesn't have.
Yeah, because you could be in a situation where you might be the only contact that that person will ever have about hearing the gospel. And you might have a limited number of opportunities, so we have to take advantage of that. And we can't put it off on someone else. That's easy to do in a lot of things, but we can't do that. We've got to take the responsibility ourselves and do what we can. Now, some people say, well, I'm not capable of teaching. And I know we have varying degrees of knowledge and things of that nature. But I always get back to thinking, okay, what did I need to know to become a Christian? God hasn't made it that difficult to obey the gospel. And if you can tell someone how you became a Christian, that should be sufficient to tell someone else, at least to pique their curiosity anyway. And then you can lead them to somebody else if they've got questions you can't answer.
Okay? Someone else? Okay. Well, let us go on ahead with our reading. Bill, where did you leave off?
We're ready for 6.
Number 6. This print is small enough I have trouble seeing it. Jack, would you do some reading?
Number 6, perseverance. Paul told Timothy to continue in these things. 1 Timothy 4:16. He said for him to be urgent in season, out of season. 2 Timothy 4:2. The preacher must do his work in spite of hardships, temptations, persecutions, and the opposition from within and without the church. Perseverance permits of no hindrance on account of any of these things. B. Take heed to teaching. 1 Timothy 4:16. Not only must the preacher be careful to keep his life right in the sight of God, but he is to be careful about his doctrine. A pure life on the part of the preacher will not atone for false doctrine preached by him. False doctrine preached by a sincere preacher will lead people to hell as surely as it is preached by a demon. 1. Hold the pattern of sound words. 2 Timothy 1:13. The gospel as preached by the apostles is considered as a pattern, a mold or form, into which Timothy was to cast his preaching and teaching. That pattern of apostolic preaching consisted of sound words, helpful expressions of truth, and Timothy could do no better than follow that pattern when he was expressing those same truths. So preachers today may maintain a pure apostolic doctrine by using the sound words used by the apostles. Unscriptural terminology and phraseology are signs of unscriptural thinking, and unscriptural thinking will find expression in unscriptural words and phrases. It is safe to speak of Bible things in Bible words and phrases, call Bible things by Bible names, and do Bible things in Bible ways. The preacher who is always trying to teach something new, do something in a new way, and who is impatient with proven methods of work and workmanship is unsafe and unsound and will likely be a troublemaker in the church. Timothy was told to abide thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them. 2 Timothy 3:14. 2. Shun false doctrines. Timothy was to refuse profane and old wives' fables. 1 Timothy 4:7. Shun profane babblings, for they will proceed further in ungodliness, and their word will eat as doth a gangrene. 2 Timothy 2:16. He was to turn away from the profane babblings and oppositions of the knowledge which is falsely so called. 1 Timothy 6:20. He was also to refuse foolish and ignorant questionings because they gender strife. 2 Timothy 2:23. He was to shun foolish questionings and genealogies and strifes and fightings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. Titus 3:9. A false doctrine concerning the resurrection would eat as doth a gangrene and overflow the faith of people. 2 Timothy 2:18. False doctrines will cause people to fall away from the faith. 1 Timothy 4:1-5. Preachers can overthrow whole families by teaching things they should not. Titus 1:10 and 11.
All right, let's talk about that. I'm thinking about where he says opposition from without and within. I've been in two congregations, not this one, but two congregations prior to this where there was a group who were of an opposite doctrinal attitude. They just plain, well, both groups believed that grace would cover anything you want to do. Basically, they did not believe that there was any law for Christians. And so they opposed me greatly, and I had to deal with that. It was a source of a great deal of grief to me. But I had to go on and preach what I thought was true, or what I knew to be true, and that would be true of any of us, again, that we would have to stand up for what we know to be true. Now let me pause and see what you have to say about what, Jack, do you have something to say about what you read?
No, I mean, basically, it's just following and teaching and preaching the Bible.
Okay. Andy, you look like you had something on your mind.
I'll save it.
Okay. All right. Rich? No? Okay, then Andy, I guess it's your turn to read.
Number 2, work. Paul's general direction to preachers is to be thou sober in all things, suffer hardships, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill thy ministry. 2 Timothy 4:5. Preach the word. 2 Timothy 4:2. This command includes all that the apostles preached and wrote for our guidance. It excludes all which cannot be found in the writings of inspired men. Preachers have the excuse me. Preachers have the ears of the people so little that it is foolish and sinful to waste that time preaching something which has no power to save them. Put the brethren in remembrance of gospel truths. 1 Timothy 4 and Titus 3. The truth is to be taught to all who do not know it, and those who know it are to be reminded continually of it. Paul says such a course is safe. Philippians 3:1. These passages teach that the evangelist is to remind the brethren of the things that have been taught, that is of the very first principles of the gospel. Reprove and rebuke. 2 Timothy 4:2, Paul says, the time will come when people will not endure the sound doctrine, but will seek teachers who will tickle their ears with false doctrines, better suited to their taste. For this departure from sound doctrine, they are to be reproved and rebuked. To some preachers, this is an unpleasant work which they are inclined to shirk. It is usually followed by loss of friends, strife, and perhaps division in the body of believers. But in spite of the consequences of doing his duty, the evangelist is to reprove and rebuke with long suffering and teaching. His reproof will not be the cause of the trouble, but the departure from sound doctrine, which he is reproving, will be the cause of the trouble. Indoctrinate the church. Paul said to Timothy, these things command and teach. These things teach and exhort. 1 Timothy 4:11 and 6:2. Again, but speak thou the things which benefit the sound doctrine. These things speak and exhort and reprove with all authority. And the things which thou hast heard from me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. 2 Timothy 2:2. First, the safety of the church depends on its being indoctrinated, lest it be carried about with every wind of doctrine. Ephesians 4:14. And lest wolves scatter and devour the flock. Acts 20:29-30. Next, the strength and effectiveness of the church depends on its being indoctrinated. The Word of God is food for the soul, 1 Peter 2, 1 through 3. And the church, which is not indoctrinated, is like a family of underfed weaklings, unable to carry on the work as vigorously and militantly as it should. Next, a church not indoctrinated is likely to make compromises with the world about both in doctrine and practices, and so soon go into complete apostasy. It is the business of the preachers as well as the elders to indoctrinate the church.
Okay, let's-
I'll stop right there.
Anybody ever heard someone use the word indoctrinate in a negative sense?
Whole bunch of people drank some Kool-Aid in South America, didn't they? They got
Yeah, but they
indoctrinated.
use, no, I mean, they use the word, they think, well, it's, indoctrination is bad.
Oh,
Yeah, I
brainwashing.
mean, I think a lot of it is got a negative, in society, people want to apply that with a negative connotation.
So the connotation we're trying to use is what, John?
Well, I think it's the same concept. You need to, have, the people have got to be ingrained or embedded in that doctrine. They have to, be wholeheartedly sold on it. And it's just got to be repeated, to the point where they believe it.
Well, basically, isn't it just training?
Yeah.
It's just training. And,
Training and exposure.
well, yeah.
Exposure to it. I mean, I found, I was reading, as we were reading through there, the part there early on, that Andy read under like B, let's see. Well, yeah, B, it was in B. Talking about going back to the first principles, and that this passage teaches that evangelists is to remind the brethren of the things that they've been taught. That is the very basic first principle of the gospel. And that ties right into the first part of the page on 90, where it was talking about, indoctrination. The first part of, safety and strength and the livelihood of the church. If the people don't have that first principles ingrained in them and repeated to them, I think that's where you get a lot of the issues that come up. And I'm flipping back and forth because, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but on page 89 in part C, talking about where, about midway through, it's, to some preachers, it's unpleasant work, which they're inclined to shirk. But, a lot of that, when you're preaching things, if somebody doesn't hear the truth often enough, when they do hear it, it hurts their feelings.
I have preached truth on some matters that I got kind of taken to task for later.
Well, maybe if they'd have heard it more frequently, they wouldn't have took the task because
Well,
they'd have
I
remembered.
think
No,
the
they're
one I-
picking at specific things that affect them, that they think that God's grace ought to cover,
Well, the
because
one-
that's as good as they can do.
The one I'm remembering, I was given to understand that had been talked about too much.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and it was a difference in belief. It was.
Well, I really think we're getting off the subject a little on the concept of indoctrination. Indoctrination really means to expose somebody to something that they didn't know beforehand. You indoctrinate someone is you teach them something that's not familiar to them. That's what indoctrination is. That's the reason they have boot camp in the Army. It's a place to indoctrinate people, let them learn concepts that they hadn't been exposed to before.
Well, the word doctrine is in that word. It
Yes,
means
it is.
teaching.
Yeah,
It means teaching. So indoctrination basically is teaching whatever the subject is.
And particularly something that was not already familiar to the hearer.
Oh, Andy, where did you quit?
Well, I had a question. Titus 2:15.
What does it say?
These things speak and exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no man despise thee. Where does that authority come from?
It's from teaching the Bible. It's the authority that you have from the Lord to say the things the Lord has said.
So you didn't get some kind of a secret handshake at preacher's school, or you learned some kind of catechism, or
No. No. Didn't, nobody laid hands on or anything.
when you graduated and got that diploma, did the Holy Spirit fall on you and say you're now?
Why are you asking this?
Point being, what is a preacher?
He's just a
A man with a message?
just a spokesman for whatever part of the Bible he's talking about.
So when you assume that role, that's when you become more responsible. That's when you need to be proved responsible to do that job.
Where did you quit?
I stopped at, what was it,
Number 3?
train teachers?
No.
He stopped at, E,
E,
train teachers, D,
Train
left-hand
teachers.
column.
I'm
E
trying to
like
find,
Elvis?
find it. Bottom of.
Left-hand column, middle of the page,
Okay.
on page 9.
All right, well, I'm going to read for a little while. Train teachers. Paul told Timothy to teach faithful men who would be able to teach others, 2 Timothy 2. The Christian religion lives if it is taught and dies if it is not taught. If the religion of Jesus Christ is to be taught to the world, then there must be teachers. And if there must be teachers, it follows that they must be taught and trained to do their work. Few people are in better position to do the training than the preacher of the gospel. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that. The preacher is not necessarily trained to train, not necessarily a part of his training. Paul made it his duty, Paul made it the duty of preachers to teach others that they in turn might be able to teach the truth. Well, if he's just talking about teaching the truth to them, then I understand it. So preachers under the oversight of the elders should be careful to maintain training classes for various activities in the church. There's where I rather question what the man has to say. Training classes in what sense? F, perfect or perfect the organization of the congregation. Now he takes this from the idea that Timothy was left in, where he was left, he was to appoint elders. Paul left Titus in Crete to set in order the things wanting and to appoint elders in every city, Titus 1. This does not mean that a congregation can't be set in order without the services of a preacher, but it does teach that preachers should accept the responsibility of organizing new congregations and starting them out in their work. Again, that may be part of this man's experience, but to me these are strange things to be teaching. Nor does this teach that the preacher must lead the congregation as soon as he gets elders appointed. He also talks about the preacher doing the appointing. He may continue to work and preach there as long as the church is pleased to use him and he's pleased to work with the church. G, guard the purity of the church. In organization, Paul wrote Timothy the qualifications of the elders and the deacons, what he might know, how to guard the purity of the organization. Men not fit to serve as overseers can ruin a church if they are allowed to become a part of the organization of the church. It is the duty of preachers to teach churches how to organize for work, how to select men capable of leading them in their work, which I have done at times when I preached about that in the auditorium. Next, in doctrine, Paul left Timothy at Ephesus to charge certain men not to teach different doctrine from that delivered to them, 1 Timothy 1. All through the books of Timothy and Titus, we find warnings about allowing men to teach different doctrines, or in other words, divisive doctrines, and the need for the continuing in things he had been taught, 2 Timothy 3. By teaching all the truth and exposing all error, they can keep the church pure doctrinally. Now, I do make the attempt to do that from time to time. The preacher should work in, he's calling it in work and worship. Departures from the truth in the work and the worship of the congregation are liable to occur anywhere at any time. The zeal of some brethren exceeds their knowledge, and they do things which churches have no business doing. And at times they do good things in unscriptural ways. Occasionally we find small churches and some settling matters by majority vote of the congregation, which of course is unscriptural. Some churches have recently gone, I don't know when this was written, so I don't know when recently is for him, have gone into the entertainment business because they know that young people need entertainment to keep them out of meanness, which I thought was a funny way of expressing that. The use of instruments of music in worship divided the church nearly 100 years ago. There's more than that now, because the preachers did not teach the truth and guard the purity of the church in its worship. Missionary societies came into use because the preachers of the gospel did not guard the purity of the work of the church. Similar things equally destructive of the peace and progress of the church can happen again in the church if we do not guard the purity of the work and worship outlined in the gospel. This material must be fairly old because missionary societies as an issue was more around the last of the 19th century, in the 19th century. I'm guessing this was written in the mid-50s. It's just a guess. In life, number 4, Paul told Timothy to rebuke even the elders when they sinned so that others might fear, 1 Timothy 5. He was to teach people the simple rules for everyday living and to exhort and command that they observe the teaching. He was even to teach our people to maintain good works for necessary uses, that they might not be unfruitful, Titus 1. So preachers are to be so concerned about the purity of the lives of people that they will teach them how to live fruitfully, and that they will set an example before the people to follow. I have made comment as I went along. Does anybody have comment they want to make? I'm going to suggest that we have been here about 45 minutes, take a small break, and then we'll do the other part, which should take less time. So if you will, please take a break. Time, and the thing about the preacher's pay and such, you can read on your own when you want to, if you want to. Let's get over to the teachers. Qualifications of teachers. There really aren't very many in the Bible specific. James said, let not many of you become teachers because you will have the harsher judgment. Of course, Paul was encouraging people to teach. By this time, you should have become teachers, the Hebrews writer talked about. So it must be two different kinds of things going on here. Those who are official teachers for the church versus those who maybe just, the author here says those who just maybe talk to a friend. But we'll read that and we'll see what it has to say. I'll begin it and then we'll pass it along. Teachers, set in the church by divine authority. 1 Corinthians 12:28 talks about some were teachers, some were pastors, some were this and that and the other. Paul tells us that God has set teachers in the church. He also tells us that they are set in the church for the purpose of perfecting the saints, or maturing the saints, bringing them from infancy to maturity, that they may not be carried about with every wind of doctrine, Ephesians 4. There was a class of servants in the New Testament churches. distinct from every other group known as teachers. This is the only person I've ever seen say that in that way, but we'll go ahead. There were teachers in the church at Antioch, Acts 13. When Paul told Titus to set the churches in order in Crete, he told him to have teachers for the purpose of training the mature. Titus 2. Paul said, or told Timothy to teach faithful men who would be able to teach others. 2 Timothy 2. Here we not only have the authority for teachers, but we have authority for training teachers to do their work. Elders are to be apt to teach, but this doesn't mean they must do all the teaching in the congregation. The elders at Antioch did not do all the teaching done in that church, for there were prophets and teachers besides Paul, who was an apostle. James warns, "Be not many of you teachers, my brethren, knowing that you shall receive heavier judgment." James 3. Paul rebukes brethren for being in the church a long time and still unable to teach others. Hebrews 5. Does Paul rebuke brethren for not being what James told them not to be? James would have all to teach others as they have opportunity, but he would have them to be slow to be one of that group known as the teachers, who gave all their time to teaching. Otherwise, there seems to be no way of harmonizing the two statements. I kind of take issue with that. I think maybe he's inventing a class of people. I think Paul is simply encouraging teaching, and James is saying, if you're going to be a teacher, be careful.
I read this and I think of, we've got to get a phylactery and we've got to get tassels on our robes and, you know.
Get you some vestments, Andy.
And then you can only preach with your breastplate with jewels in it, you know.
I'm fresh out of Ephesus. All right, let's go on. Let me see. I keep losing my place.
Number 2.
Yeah, number 2.
I
Yeah.
derailed you.
Lloyd, would you care to read for a while? Number 2?
I don't know my voice will hold out.
Well, you just do as much as you feel like.
This section that is on the subject of qualifications of teachers, they must know that which they would teach. Nothing can be more fundamental or simple than this axiom. Yet there are people trying to teach who do not know the material they try to handle. In order for teachers to know the truth, they must be taught. Churches are giving more and more time and attention to training their teachers, both in what to teach and how to teach it. And yet we have hardly begun to do what we are capable of doing if we will organize and train all our forces at hand. Another qualification of teachers is they must be faithful Christians. Churches sin against children when they send unfaithful men and women into their classrooms to teach. A woman who went to a picture show in preference to prayer meeting Wednesday night is not fit to teach children the Word of God the following Sunday morning. A man who went to his lodge meeting in preference to prayer meeting is unfit to teach young people Sunday morning. We need people who love the church and are faithful to attend its services, who love children and are willing to deny themselves ungodliness and worldly lust, that they may set a good example before them in order to gain their respect and confidence. A converted and consecrated group of teachers is a great force for righteousness in the community, but a worldly group of teachers who prefer card parties and picture shows to prayer meetings and Sunday night services can destroy the faith of young people. We are not losing young people from the church because the call of the world is too alluring to them. We are losing them because the call of of their parents and teachers is too weak and inconsistent. A third qualification is they must be sound in the faith. The only way we can have teachers who are sound in the faith is to give them instruction and not indoctrinate. One who is not willing to give time to attend a class 1 or 2 hours during the week should not be allowed to teach the class. No teacher can go long without being taught and not get dull and stale. People want to fire the preacher when he gets to repeating himself, but they seem to think a teacher can teach for years in the same class without ever taking a refresher course and never get stale. The pupils in the class think differently. There are many teachers in our churches who could not take a freshman examination on any book in the Bible and make a passing grade. Such conditions are shameful and should be remedied. The fourth qualification of a teacher must be willing to sacrifice. In order to make a success of teaching a class of children, one must not only be willing to give time for study, but he or she must be willing to devote hours per week visiting in homes of the members of the class and in going with them to see their friends, trying to increase the attendance and the opportunities for good. And one who prefers to attend a card party or a garden club to doing such work is not spiritually fit to teach a class. Let not the reader conclude that the writer is opposed to teachers attending social functions, but one who has time to attend these social functions and then says they do not have time to give to attending a class for their edification or time to work for the advancement of the class shows plainly that they prefer to give their time to worldly matters and reveals unfitness for teaching. And
All right.
I deliberately blurred
Her.
She and her for their.
the she and her and to let it be whatever.
Okay.
I'll stop right there, Bill.
All right.
This guy wrap this in his bomb shelter.
Pardon?
I think it's
This is bomb
older,
shelter.
I think it's older than 1950, to be honest.
Well, his thinking is.
Huh?
At least
Oh,
his
his
thinking.
thinking is,
At least
yes,
his
yeah,
thinking is.
Good point, good point.
I just leave that to your judgment. I mean,
Well, I mean, I'm not disagreeing, I'm
Maybe
just.
just a girl jumping in the station, well, it wouldn't be a station wagon, and going to a talkie show. instead of going to church.
I tried to look up when
1927
was the word picture show used, and I mean, it talked about the 1920s and stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, the terminology is one thing, but the message is
Message is
another.
still the same.
Yeah.
well, we do have a different vocabulary than this fellow uses, to some extent.
He's, you know, can we talk?
If you wish.
I mean, you know, I thought he was putting a lot on the preacher, you know, setting him up pretty high, but he's doing the same. He's pretty hard on the teachers here too, you know,
Well,
Well,
high
let's face it,
standards.
the author of this book, I think, tried to present the ideal situation. He says this is what we should be striving for. The question is, how near to the perfection do we have to get
Yeah.
before we can say we were successful?
I think he's also teaching improvement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, he's setting the bar high,
Yeah.
no doubt, but we need to be striving for, as we was reading through that, I was thinking about classes. Teachers need to be prepared for their class as best as they can. Now, you're gonna run into some subjects, especially like we do on Sunday morning, we're going through the books of the Bible, and you'll have a better understanding of some books than you will others. Certain parts of a book you might understand better than others. I just know from personal experience, what I try to do is study other people, what they think the scriptures are saying, and try to formulate my own opinion of what they're saying as opposed to the scripture, how it meshes up together. So, you've got to put the study time in, because if you don't, your class will lose interest, because they'll see you don't really know what you're saying to a certain extent. Another point that I'd like to make too, if we could have more teachers, we could give other teachers not only a break, but also the opportunity to hear other teachers. And I think that's how you sort of hone your own teaching ability and traits, by hearing others. So I think that's very important. A teacher that has to teach Sunday and Wednesday, I think you're the only one that has to do that, doesn't give them a lot of opportunity to hear others. But I know you go to like lectureships and stuff, which I'm sure that helps. But it's good to hear other people teach occasionally, because preparing to teach a lesson and preparing to be a student for a lesson, to me, is two different things. I go a lot deeper if I'm going to teach, because if I don't get any response, I've got to come up with something to add to the lesson if others aren't going to do it. So I think that's a difference we need to look at as well. Last part he was talking about visiting the students in their homes and stuff. I don't know if in this day and time if that's even possible, because the lifestyles that we live, I think the most important thing is when you do have them in class, that you teach them Bible things that they can implement in their lives. Because just like our congregation here, we've got people that live in several different counties. It wouldn't be really feasible, I guess, to try to go around like that. I mean, maybe back in the day when a church was located in a small community, that might have been possible then, but the way things are now, I really can't see how that would work too well.
Okay.
Well, I had the privilege once upon a time in my younger life to attend a class that was taught by a master chief in the Navy, and he taught us it was a school to learn to be a teacher, because I was being prepared to be a teacher in the Navy at that time. And he came in, and for an hour, at least an hour, he never told us a thing. He asked questions. And we learned more in that hour than if he'd have just stood there and lectured. Because he forced us to think and to clarify the thoughts that we were having. And when I left that class, I thought I was at least quite a bit smarter than when I went in there. And he hadn't told me a thing. He had showed me that I already knew it. I just I hadn't put it into words. Mm-hmm. And the same way with those other guys in the class. There are ways of teaching that are interesting, and there are ways of teaching that are boring. We need to find ways to teach so that people who are listening to us are not bored. They get something out of it. And that's, I think, being a teacher, we need to cultivate ideas and methods that are interesting to the class.
Can I say something? I think one way that makes classes more engaging and interesting is if there's, involvement, and not just the individual, and we're talking about where there's mixed men and women, where you got a man just standing up there talking the whole time. Where there's, participation from the class makes it more interesting, even for those that don't participate. They're not, and can I use Bill here? They're not listening to Bill the whole time, they're listening to John throw in his 2 cents, or David, or Mr. Hornbuckle, or somebody, throw in their 2 cents, which, gives the teacher a little reprieve, and makes the audience mind have to engage a little more. But, so the question is, how do you get people to participate? I think one thing that causes people to not want to participate is, they think if they say something that might not be quite right, or they're just, 100%, perfect, that they'll be frowned upon, or chastised, or put in their place, if you want to use that word, either by the instructor, or the leader of the class, or others in the class. Now, that's just my perception. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because if I say something and I misspoke, just like I dismembered somebody the other day, things like that happen. And luckily, Chad flinched, and I said, I said dismembered. And people have got to understand that when you're speaking, that sometimes things come out, not the way you meant for it to come out. Or it's perceived in a manner that you didn't intend for it to be. And that's why I think there should just be gentle, open dialogue. And, when there's more of a camaraderie in that room, there'll be more participation. I mean, sitting around my table at home, if my kids think I'm gonna smack them when they open their mouth, they're not gonna say anything.
Is this a
They
problem?
know better than to ask you for money.
At the dinner table,
Is this a problem, John?
well, I've mellowed some, Philip, in my,
Since you started feeding them goat milk.
did I tell that story?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, okay.
Mixing stuff, half,
Yeah.
all kinds of
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we best get on. Rich, are you willing to read some for me?
Sure.
Starting at
Can I
B.
read without putting the scripture verse in there, because I think that takes away from it. We can read that.
Do what you wish.
Okay. Women teachers. We have some good brethren who think women are not allowed to teach under the supervision of elders. Thinks it's a sin for a woman to teach a class of young women or children on Sunday morning while other classes are being taught. But Paul says teachers are set in the church by God's authority. He told us Titus, and he told Titus to have 80 women be teachers of good things to train the young women. And this was to be done when setting the churches in order. No church is fully set in order that does not have mature women teaching and training young women. Philip had 4 virgin daughters who were prophets, whose work was to edify. Women labored with Paul in the gospel. Since women are to teach, yet they must not teach when the whole church comes together. We conclude that some arrangement must be made wherein they can teach without violating the restriction placed about them. They can do it in either of 2 ways. First, they may teach one person at a time. Second, they may teach in groups and classes. If a woman has 20 young women she can teach, she must teach them one by one and use 20 hours when he could as well teach them all at once and do 1 hour, what otherwise would take 20 hours to do. Surely the Lord has not forced an arrangement upon her that will compel her to spend 20 hours doing what she could have done more efficiently in 1 hour, more effectively than 1 hour.
A lot of the rest of this is him throwing in opinions, so you can go fast if you wish.
Okay. Teaching situation, place. It goes without saying that the church building is the best place to teach a group of people. But it's not enough to have a house or a separate room. That room should be inviting, comfortable, and clean. It should be difficult to give too much attention to providing a favorable situation for teaching the Bible, especially to children. Yet many churches have paid little attention to this matter, thinking they have done well so long they provide a room, a rough table, and uncomfortable benches. Equipment. Good materials such as well-written books, maps, working books, colorizing material for children, and a dozen other things which catch and hold the interest of children are necessary if the job of teaching is to be done well. Many teachers who are doing an ordinary job now without proper equipment can do a wonderful piece of work if churches would provide the equipment they need. Brethren save pennies and lose children by not providing proper equipment for the teachers. If brethren do not know what to provide, let them call in men who have made special preparation in this field and advise them. Number 3, time for teaching. Brethren are generally convinced that Sunday morning is a good time for teaching. Some think that's the only time. But just before the Sunday night service is just a good time. Why not? 10 days during the summer, we have the opportunity to teach children more than 2 hours a day. Yet many churches are not taking advantage of this opportunity to have a vacation Bible school. Many who are not experienced in such work think a child will get more good from those 20 hours of instruction than he would get from a whole year in Sunday school. Actually, there is a little difference in the amount of time the teacher has the pupil in a year of Sunday school and in the 10 days of vacation school. Supervision, number 4. All teaching of the church should be under the general supervision of the elders. One of the elders, or a man selected by them, should have immediate supervision over the teaching program. With the counsel and approval of the elders, he should select all the teachers so that they are trained in their work and they give enough time to it to make a success of it. If they are unable or unwilling to give enough time to it, he should remove them. He should know the equipment needed and see that all teachers have what they need. It's his business to classify the pupils and see that they have study materials suited to the age and their needs. The Sunday school needs supervision as much as the public school needs supervision, and it needs trained supervisors the same as does the public school.
That ends our outline. Rich, first of all, do you have something to say about what you read?
Well, I mean, it's nice, but some people kind of take things to, these things are a bang of all of us, and especially young kids, right? So, we need to make sure that we don't overdo equipment, as he calls it, for instruction. Maybe the simple things are still the best things as long as they can keep your attention.
Okay. Somebody else have a remark?
This kind of hits home. I mean, are we doing some of the things in C1, Many churches paid little attention to this matter, thinking they've done well so long. They provide a room with a rough table, uncomfortable benches, this book is definitely old. We never had benches in here, but in the classrooms. But, especially for those young children, and, Richie was talking about the cell phones, and for the older kids, that's the key issue. But, if you're talking about
kids are on their tablets all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, here you go, shut up.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about younger ones?
All of them.
Yeah. I guess.
I have, kids that before they can talk real well, they know how to work a tablet or a cell phone.
Yeah.
They can flip through the interface easy.
Yeah.
They can find you 2 kids in a heartbeat.
Probably better than I could. So, I think, a lot of times I think we neglect the children, and especially as we get older, we think that, we kind of lose touch, with the younger mindset and generation and how to, interact and engage with them. Now, I'm not saying, by no means doing something, that, in a worldly thing, but, even back when this guy wrote that book, young people thought and acted different than adults. And they needed things that engaged them and allowed them to learn the scriptures and retain things.
That's
Other
groovy,
thing,
John.
the other thing I said, I read this 10-day vacation Bible school. I'm 53 years old. I never remember one of those.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I don't know if it's so much things. It might be, we need to come up with maybe different methods of teaching that would keep them engaged in studying the scriptures. I mean, equipment is such a broad heading. I don't know how sophisticated we need to get with equipment. I think a lot of it just depends on the teacher themselves, on how they can present the material, because kids can be happy with simple things if they're made, if we're the teachers can encourage them to learn in a atmosphere that they like. I mean, in school, in regular secular school, you had a desk and a teacher, basically. But yet, I had different teachers that had an effect on me as far as my learning. Like I had a history teacher, I'm thinking one in particular. When she taught, it wasn't like she was just lecturing. You lived what she was teaching, because she had some practical experience to it, but the material that she was teaching sort of came to life, and you was almost hanging on her every word because she done such a good job of teaching. So I think,
History lends itself to storytelling.
yeah, and she was very good at it. Of course, like I said, she lived some of it that she was teaching because it was Tennessee history, and I think that can carry over to teaching kids today, because I know my kids, for example, the teachers they've had in the past, they've had some that they've really liked real well, and had some that maybe they didn't care for as much, but they still learned. So it's good to have equipment. I'm not saying we shouldn't. If there's something that we need, we would do everything we could to get it if we thought it was necessary. But I think the main thing is the teacher. That's the most important part of a class, regardless whatever else you could bring in.
Well, really what he was talking about in equipment was material.
Right, I
Books,
understand that.
maps, workbooks,
Right.
color material for the children, not so much as, projectors and stuff like that, which may be more beneficial to the older kids in today's society. But, our younger kids,
Well, I think if the teachers need that kind of material,
yeah,
I think if they, if they say, okay, I need maps of,
yeah.
like during Abraham's time,
Yeah,
we'll say.
yeah.
That's fine, and we would try to supply that. But you have some teachers that wouldn't even use stuff like that. And, why use the Lord's money to buy things that are not going to be used?
Well, let me
So I
ask
think,
you something.
that gets back to the teachers again. If
Right.
it is something they'll use, that's great. But if they're not going to use it, let's not waste money on it.
But, let me ask this question. There are things that I've been asked to do, and, I don't know that there's tools, we'll use the word tools, that would help me do that job more efficiently. Or I'm trying to repair something at my house, and I didn't have the knowledge of the tools that would make that work easier.
Right.
So are we, are we doing what this guy says? Are we teaching the teachers how to teach? Are we teaching them that there's resources out there? And this goes back to, maybe there's somebody, I'm not an educator. Mike Robinson You know, you could tell he was an educator when he did his classes, because he had all the little, picture boards, if you call it that. I don't know, I don't know what you call it.
Visual aids.
Visual aid. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And, you know, I mean, I'm like, man, I never would have thought of doing something like that, but, you know, it kept you on track, and, you know, you progressed through the talk. So, you know, are we, you know, we're wanting people to be teachers, and we're wanting them to do a good job, but are we guiding them, or have we guided them to the point where they're going to be competent?
Well, they will with experience, I think, a lot of times too.
A lot of times, being the assistant to an older teacher is the way we've done that. If she was a good teacher, they could,
At what level? At the youth at the
young level,
3, 4, 5-year-old level?
yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
What about the
9.
middle school level?
I don't
How
know.
about the adult class?
High school level?
Everyone knows how to teach that.
Yeah.
I have become amazed at some of the things that I've heard in my class.
Well, look,
Well, that goes back to, you know, being careful and not being, you know, chastising or coming across, or, you know, when people, that's what classes are for people to ask questions and, you know, to learn. And, you know, something they're not 100%. You know, I'm gonna close on this right here, something that, on page 91, part B. Found this rather interesting. You look on page 91 under B, about the, after the heading, the third or fourth one down, it's talking about teachers. And it's talking about Paul. He tells us that they, the teachers, are set in the church for the purpose of perfecting the saints, bringing them from infancy to maturity, that they may not be carried away with every wind, you know, of doctrine.
So how do we set that metric?
Hold on, I'm just saying that this guy is saying that you know, that role of perfecting the saints is cast upon the teachers. I dare say that many believe that that role is the role of the preacher, to perfect the saints, and in his role in standing up in front of the congregation on Sunday morning. But if you look on page 89, it says, the passage, there's a passage quoted, the passage is several passages, this is in part B. Teach us that the evangelist is to remind the brethren of the things that they have been taught, that is, of the very first principles of the gospel. So, you know, it was kind of, you know, the concept there that the teacher's job is to perfect the saints, and the preacher's job is to, you know, remind the brethren of the things they've been taught.
Otherwise, we need to remember too, that this man's putting a lot of opinion in this.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily agree with everything he says.
I think it'd be more of a combination.
Yeah, I would go with you, Bill, on that concept.
We're disintegrating into a seminar. And,
I thought we were here to talk and learn. I mean,
We
that's
are.
interesting to me.
Okay.
That whole concept. We can talk about it offline. I mean, if we got it, you know.
Well, we just got some people.
You got me here, Bill, and I'm sorry, Bill.
That's okay.
Well, I guess Lloyd and Bill and Philip, you know, you got me here. And so, you know, I'm trying to engage and,
Mhm.
And we got his brain stimulated, let's go with it. While we're
right. I'll be honest, I'm slow to get started, you know, but once I get to going, it's like, oh, this leads to this and this.
Once you get primed, you're ready.
Right, there you go.
As we set these points to be met, how do we follow up and be sure that we're meeting these requirements as teachers? And keeping in mind, yes, you've got each individual student in class, some may have progressed further and aren't grasping. There's no remedial reading class in the Bible. Some are ready to go on, and others are still pulling back. Where do you set the metric to meet the needs of everybody and leave nobody behind?
That is a common problem in any.
It didn't work in Tennessee schools.
Yeah.
We got dumbed down to the lowest common denominator.
That's exactly right.
And I see the same thing happening in the church.
Yeah. That's where you would, you know, if you want to, but anytime you're addressing an audience, you're gonna have, no matter whether it's in church or at work or anywhere, the level of knowledge is going to be, you know, greatly spread, no matter what the topic is. And you gotta shoot for a happy median so that.
Brother, I'm teaching on a 3rd grade level and people are still missing it.
Well, they've been going here for 40 years, so what's the problem?
They've been Christians longer than I've been alive.
Yeah. So, you know, then that begs that question of what happened?
Well, I remember something that was said years and years ago. It was talking about a teacher. Said this teacher was retiring from public schools. Said she had 25 years of teaching experience. And somebody else said, no, she had 1 year of teaching experience and she had repeated it 25 times. And I never forgot that. You just can't dumb it all down. You gotta leave a little, a tassel on the cornstalk for somebody that can reach it. Don't put everything down at the root level.
Well, I think, you know, part of it is, you know, these things that cause, what causes division and strife in the church? You know, it's doctrinal matters. And a lot of times it's a lack of understanding of the doctrinal matters, you know.
But those are hard. Those offend me, so I need to find a way around that. And
Well,
I'm here to
Dave-
learn my way around it.
Well, here's kind of what I think about, and I really don't know what you're talking about.
Well,
but,
yeah.
But it goes back to the indoctrination part. And I did look up the definition of indoctrination, and as Lloyd pointed out, you know, it is about teaching. It's the process of teaching a person or a group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. So how do you get people to believe things? You know, how do you get people to believe things? Through repetition. I mean, I think Hitler said, you know, you tell a lie, or his master
Tell a lie
manipulator,
enough.
huh?
Was it, you tell a lie enough, long enough and loud enough,
It's going to become
the truth.
Yeah. So the point is there, it's, you know, you just keep, you know, repeating and indoctrinating people. And so, you know, if a young child grows up, and you know, we're sitting here, I'm just going to end, I don't know if we want to go, it doesn't appear as though we're ready for just general discussion, so. I felt like you were ready to go, Philip.
Rock
so-
on, buddy.
I'm not standing in the way.
Rock on.
Well, I don't want to keep anybody from, you know, trust me, you know, I gotta go get gas, go to Lowe's, go home, fix 2 or 3 things that are broke right now, so.
You might not get to go to Lowe's.
Why?
Well, it's 25 till 9.
What time they come?
9.
No.
Well, see, it get put off to another day. I
I'm
mean, literally, I
hearing you
got,
talk, John.
huh?
I'm kind of enjoying hearing
I
you
got wires sticking out of my light switch right now.
Well, just don't touch them if they're lying. They
They're
are.
hot. because I want to turn the other light switch on and off. So if one of my kids come in with curly hair, you're gonna know they accidentally touched that
You might
on.
wanna use
Grab
some
some
black
tape.
I bet you
electrical
they won't
tape
do it again.
or wire nuts to you.
I have some wire nuts, but I hadn't done it.
John, you were in the middle of saying something.
So, you know, we're all adults, and most of our congregation is, I'll say, mature in age. I mean, time out. You
Trying to
got
say
that
they're open
recording?
here.
You got that recording?
Mhm.
Cut it off. I mean, is this part of the class? This is a discussion.